Welcome, Honorable President Weidmann, honorable members of the Executive Board of the Bundesbank, Mr. Thiele, Mr. Dombret, Mr. Beermann, dear Consul General of Mexico, Ms. Villanueva, dear Mr. Hackarainen, member of the Supervisory Board of the ECB, dear Mr. Stars, member of the Management Board of the Deutsche Börse, honorable members of the Bank of International Settlements, Mr. Shin, Claessens, Ms. Ho, distinguished colleagues and guests. Being a principal investigator of SAFE and member of the House of Finance myself, and in my capacity as Vice President for Internationalization of Goethe University, I'm particularly delighted to welcome you here at Goethe University's still growing campus West End for today's lecture on one of the currently most pressing issues of the economic functions and foundations of money, shedding light on policy questions surrounding cryptocurrencies and central banks' roles in payment systems and digital money issuance. Goethe University is greatly honored to host this lecture, and I would like to take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks to the organizers and sponsors, and of course to today's highly prominent speaker, Agustín Carstens, General Manager of the Bank of International Settlements. Ladies and gentlemen, the Research Center SAFE and its Policy Center bring together two key characteristics of Goethe University. The SAFE Policy Center and its offices in Brussels and Frankfurt aims at creating and maintaining a continuous dialogue with high-ranking policymakers in Germany and Europe, in short, at reaching out into the outside world in order to contribute, based on state-of-the-art research, to a sustainable development of financial markets oriented towards stability and growth. As a whole, Goethe University, as an institution, has always been known for its reach into society. It had originally been founded in 1914 by wealthy citizens of the city of Frankfurt and was the first university in Germany to be funded exclusively on the basis of donation. That's why, in fact, it understands itself up to this day as a university of and for the citizens of its home city. This was the historical background when Goethe University has become a foundation under public law in 2008 and no longer a state-run institution of higher education. This new legal status makes Goethe University one of the few German universities enjoying a considerable degree of institutional autonomy and largely increases our capacity to raise funds for our research. This goes back to my introductory remark about the contribution of SAFE to the two key characteristics of Goethe University, that it is its status as a research center aiming at producing internationally visible research. Goethe University is a research university as well. Over its 100 years of history, our university has developed strong profiles in both the social and the natural sciences. To highlight some particular strongholds of Goethe University, we're known for being a hotspot in biomolecular research and for housing the world-famous Institute for Social Research, tied to the names of Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. One of the latest additions is the Research Center SAFE, Sustainable Architecture for Finance in Europe, located at the House of Finance. It analyzes the requirements for the optimal framework, a sustainable architecture for financial markets and their agents. SAFE aims to become a leading research center in Europe on all areas relevant for developing such a sustainable architecture that offers a dynamic interaction with policymakers and society while engaging a critical mass of young researchers and professionals in SAFE activities. In order to successfully achieve all these goals, which include first and foremost creating such rewarding opportunities and moments of intellectually productive encounters like today's lecture, making Goethe University a highly visible lighthouse not only of teaching and research, but also of public debate. I very much hope that you will also be able to enter into such an inspiring and fruitful debate today. Thank you.
Dear Augustine, dear Professor Ha, dear Ottmar, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and a privilege to welcome you to the joint lecture of the SAFE Policy Center, the Center of Financial Studies, and the Deutsche Bundesbank. Today, we welcome a former Minister of Finance, a former central bank governor, a former Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, a graduate from the University of Chicago, and an erstwhile general manager of the Bank for International Settlements. Normally, this constitutes a highly exciting composition for a panel discussing monetary and financial issues. But today, we're even going to top that. Our speaker has held all those positions, not at the same time, but at some point in his career. So I'm talking about Agustín Carstens. After graduating with a PhD from the University of Chicago, Agustín, you began your career at the Central Bank of Mexico. You then became executive director at the IMF before being appointed Mexico's deputy finance minister and then deputy managing director at the IMF. In 2006, you returned to Mexico City from Washington to serve as Minister of Finance. And it was in this position, and this is rather unusual for a finance minister, that you earned something of a reputation in the oil market. In 2008, you insured Mexico's oil revenues against lower oil prices, a move that earned Mexico $8.5 billion in 2009. Some traders joked that you were the year's most successful but worst paid oil manager. The finance ministry was by no means the end of your career. Between 2010 and 2017, you served as governor of the Bank of Mexico. And in December last year, you added the most recent entry to your CV when you became general manager of the BIS. And Agustín, allow me to say that you're an excellent choice for the position. I'm already looking forward to working with you in Basel. We started doing so, and it's a pleasure. And I'm certain that the BIS will benefit from your enormous experience. This experience manifests itself not only in the long list of positions that you have held in your impressive career, but also in the economic events you have witnessed during that time. It's safe to say that your career has been highly eventful in this respect, In the 90s, when you headed the research department at the Banco de Mexico, Mexico went through what was referred to as the tequila crisis when it encountered difficulties in financing its large current account deficit. And in 2008, as Mexico's Minister of Finance, you helped coordinate an international response to the global financial crisis in the G20. And it was during that time that we first met, and I was impressed by your strong push for an international response to the crisis. It helped prevent the world from falling back into trade protectionism and an even deeper recession. And it established the G20 as the key body for international economic cooperation, not only in the field of financial market regulation. The common efforts of the G20 demonstrated that multilateral cooperation does work, a message which is worth repeating these days when some countries never seem to tire of doubting the meaning of multilateral agreements. Agustín, at the height of the sovereign debt crisis in the euro area, you allowed the euro area to benefit from your vast experience. In 2013, in a speech you held then, you drew on lessons from Mexico's tequila crisis for the euro area. Two of your conclusions were that an exchange rate system or a common currency cannot substitute for policy discipline. And you also pointed out that fiscal discipline needs to be maintained even after the crisis, and this is, of course, very close to our thinking here at the Bundesbank. It also appeared to me that at that time you were tactfully trying to remind us in the euro area to make progress in crisis resolution. And I'm aware that many considered the sovereign debt crisis to be a risk to the global economy. And that's why I'm happy to be able to state that matters have improved substantially. Since then, the euro area has switched from being a drag on growth to a driver on growth. In 2017, the euro area grew slightly faster than the average of the advanced economies overall. And the foundation of the European Stability Mechanism, the creation of the single supervisory mechanism, and the enactment of a common bank recovery and resolution directive in Europe have all contributed to making the architecture of the euro area more stable. The greatest risk now would be to assume that all the problems have been solved. Shocks in specific regions or specific sectors of the economy can still subject the euro area to an endurance test despite the progress that has been made in the past years. But at least at times when first the financial and then the sovereign debt crisis required the full attention of policymakers, regulators, and bank supervisors are now behind us. We're now able to turn some of our attention at least to other important issues, one of which is undoubtedly the digitalization of finance. The Bundesbank placed this topic on the agenda of the G20 during Germany's presidency last year, and one important aspect of this issue we weren't able to look at within the framework of the G20 concerns the possibilities but also the risks that come with the issuance of digital tokens or even digital central bank money. The question whether new technology fundamentally changes the foundations of central banking has become a topic of increasing debate among central bankers. Agustín, your talk today is most welcome because it will contribute to an objectivation of the debate, and it will constitute also an important input for our policy discussions. I'm very happy that we are able to attract such a distinguished speaker for this task. Agustín, the floor is yours. Thanks for coming.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Jens Weidmann for his extremely kind introduction. And as well as you are willing to work with me at the BIS, I'm extremely happy to be working with you there, in particular given that you are the chairman of the board. And with a very, very And I would say with the extremely good guidance of this tremendously powerful and interesting institution. I also would like to thank Professor Brigitte Haar. She just left, but I leave it for the record, my thank to her for having hosting us here today. And above all, it's an honor to discuss money at an event organized by the Bundesbank, which has been a beacon of stability since its foundation some 60 years ago. And in particular, I'm also very pleased that the one who will conduct the Q&A session will be Otmar Issing, which is also an institution in monetary matters. As Jens can attest, being a central banker is a fascinating job. In fact, it is a privilege. During the last decade, it has been anything but quiet in the central banking world. We have been confronted with extraordinary circumstances that have required extraordinary policy responses. In such an environment, it has been of the utmost importance to share experiences and lessons learned among central banks, creating a body of knowledge that will be there for the future. One of the reasons that central bank governors from all over the world gather in Basel every 2 months is precisely to discuss issues at the front and center of the policy debate. Following the great financial crisis, many hours have been spent discussing the design and implementations of, for example, unconventional monetary policies such as quantitative easing and negative interest rates. Lately, we have seen a bit of a shift to issues at the very heart of central banking. This shift is driven by developments at the cutting edge of technology. While it has been bubbling under the surface for years, the meteoric rise of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies has led us to revisit some fundamental questions that touch on the origin and raison d'etre for central banks. What is money? What constitutes good money, and where do cryptocurrencies fit in? And finally, what role should central banks play? The thrust of my lecture will be that, at the end of the day, money is an indispensable social convention backed by an accountable institution within the state that enjoys public trust. Many things have served as money, but experience suggests that something widely accepted, reliably provided and stable in its command over goods and services works best. Experience has also shown that to be credible, money requires institutional backup, which is best provided by a central bank. While central banks' actions and services will evolve with technological developments, the rise of cryptocurrencies only highlights the important role central banks have played and continue to play as stewards of public trust. Private digital tokens posing as currencies, such as Bitcoin and other crypto assets that have mushroomed of late, must not endanger this trust in the fundamental value and nature of money. So what is money? This is obviously a key question for any central banker and one on which economists have spent much ink. The answer depends on how deep and philosophical one wants to be. Being at a university, especially one named after Goethe, I think I can err on the side of being philosophical. Conventional wisdom tells you that money is what money does. That is, money is a unit of account, a means of payments, and a store of value. But telling you what something does not really tell you what it is. And it certainly does not tell you why we need or have money, how it comes about, and what the preconditions are for it to exist. In terms of the need for money, you may learn that money is a way to get around the general lack of double coincidence of wants. That is, it is rare that I have what you want and you have what I want at the same time. As barter is definitely not an efficient way to organizing an economy, money is demanded as a tool to facilitate exchange. What about the other side of the coin, so to speak? How does money come about? Again, conventional wisdom may tell you that central banks provide money, i.e. cash, and commercial banks supply deposits. But this answer is often not fully satisfactory, as it does not tell why and how banks should be the one to create money. If you venture into more substantive analysis on monetary economics, things get more complex. One theory, which proposes that money is memory, amounts to arguing that a superledger can facilitate exchange, just like money. This argument says a ledger is a way of keeping track of not only who has what, but also who owes and is owed what. I will come back to this later. Moving beyond this line of thought, other scholarly and historical analyses provide answers that are more philosophical. This often amounts to money is a convention. One party accepts it as payment in the expectation that others will also do so. Money is an IOU, but a special one because everyone in the economy trusts that it will be accepted by others in exchange for goods and services. One might say money is a we all owe you. Many things have served as money in this way. This figure that is presented gives some examples. Japstones, gold coins, cigarettes in war times, 100,000 bills, Wiesel, bills of exchange or bearer notes, such as those issued by the Bank of Amsterdam in the first half of the 17th century. It includes an example from my own country, Aztec axe money, a form of unstamped money made of copper used in central Mexico and parts of Central America many centuries ago. Coming to most of these examples is that the nominal value of the items that have served at one time as money is unrelated to their intrinsic value. Indeed, as we know very well in the case of fiat money, the intrinsic value of most of its representations is zero. History shows that money as a convention needs to have a basis of trust, supported by some form of institutional arrangement. As Curcio Giannini puts it, the evolution of monetary institutions appears to be, above all, the fruit of a continuous dialogue between economic and political spheres, with each taking turns to create monetary innovations and to safeguard the common interest against abuse stemming from partisan interests. Money can come in different institutional forms and colors. How to organize them? The paper by Beck and Garat in last September's BIS Quarterly Review presented the money flower as a way of organizing monies in today's environment. It acknowledges that money can take on rather different forms and be supplied in various ways. So let me go now to the flower that is trademarked by the BIS. We don't sell seeds on this flower. But the money flower highlights 4 key properties on the supply side of money: the issuer, the form, the degree of accessibility, and the transfer mechanism. The issuer can be either the central bank or other. Other includes nobody, that is, a particular type of money that is not a liability of anyone. In terms of the form it takes, money is either electronic or physical. Accessibility refers to how widely the type of money is available. It can either be wide or limited. Transfer mechanism can either be a central intermediary or peer-to-peer, meaning transactions occur directly between the payer and the payee without the need for a central intermediary. Let us look at where some common types of money fit into the flower, starting with cash, as we know it today. Cash is issued by the central bank, is not electronic, is available to everyone, and is peer-to-peer. I do not need a trusted third party, let's say like Jens, to help me pay each of you 10 euros. That I will not do, but let us try another one, bank deposits. They are not the liability of the central bank, mostly electronic, and in most countries available to most people, but clearly not peer-to-peer. Transferring resources from a bank deposit requires the involvement of at least your own bank, perhaps the central bank, and the recipient's bank. Think here not only of commercial bank deposits, but also bills, e.g. not interest-bearing certificates issued privately, as in the case of the Bank of Amsterdam mentioned earlier. Local or regional currencies are the ones that can be spent in a particular geographical location at participating organizations. They tend to be physical. The Tumin, for example, was a local currency circulating illegally for some time around 2010, exclusively in the Mexican municipality of El Espinal. What does digitalization mean for the flower? Digitalization is nothing new. Financial services and most forms of money have been largely digital for many years. Much of the ongoing transformation is just adding a mobile version for many services, which means that the device becomes a virtual extension of the institution. As such, there is not a new model. The money flower then also easily accommodates these forms. That is also the case for the digital account-based forms of money that central banks traditionally have made available to commercial banks, and in some instances to certain other financial or public institutions, i.e. bank reserves. It would also be the case if the central bank were to issue digital money to the wider public for general purposes. Each central bank will have to make its own decision on whether issuing digital money is desirable, after considering factors such as the structure of the financial system and underlying preferences for privacy. The central bank community is actively analyzing this issue. A potentially important and leapfrogging digital-related development, however, is distributed ledger technology, better known by DLT, the basis for Bitcoin. Many think DLT could transform financial service provision, maybe first wholesale, then possibly retail. For example, it could enhance settlement efficiency involving securities and derivatives transactions. A few central banks have conducted experiments in this area. For example, the Bank of Canada, the Bundesbank, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and the Bank of England. Yet doubts remain regarding the maturity of DLT and the size of associated efficiency gains relative to existing technologies. Moreover, the robustness, including to cyber risk, is still to be fully understood and ascertained. Still, there are potential benefits, and I expect that central banks will remain engaged on this topic. For now, DLT is largely used to create Bitcoin and other digital currencies. Such cryptocurrencies can be placed easily in the money flower. Nobody issues them. They are not physical and they are peer-to-peer. But beyond that, how should one think about them? Just because we are able to find a place for Bitcoin in our money flower does not mean we should consider it as good money. As I mentioned before, trust is a fundamental tenet that underpins credible currencies, and this trust has to be earned and supported. There are many lessons from history and institutional economics on the earning of trust that we can use as we move further into digitalization. Over the ages, many forms of private money have come and gone. It is fair to say that the same has happened with various experiments with public money, that is, money issued by a public entity that is not the central bank. While some last longer than others, most have invariably given way to some form of central bank money. The main reason for their disappearance is that the incentives to cheat are simply too high. Let me give three historical examples, one in Germany, another in the US, and the last one in Mexico. In Germany, the 30-year war involving small German states of the Holy Roman Empire and neighboring regional powers was associated with one of the most severe economic crises ever recorded, with rampant hyperinflation, just as happened 3 centuries later during the Weimar Republic, and the breakdown of trade and economic activity. The crisis became known as the Kipper und Bippert Zeit, after the practice of clipping coins and sorting good coin for bad. This morning, we are launching a BIS working paper by Professor Isabel Schnabel and BS Economic Advisor Hyun Shin, which further details and explains this experience as background to my speech. While episodes of currency debasement have occurred throughout history, this one stands out for 2 reasons. First is the severity of the crisis and its rapid regional spread. Debasement proceeded at such a pace that public authorities quickly lost control of the downward spiral. Second is how the debasement was brought under control. This occurred through standardization of wholesale payments by public deposit banks, for example, the Bank of Hamburg and the Bank of Amsterdam. These were in many ways examples of the precursors of modern central banks. As the working paper argues, monetary order should be brought to an otherwise chaotic situation by providing reliable payments means through precursors to central bank money, which at the end means the use of a credible institutional arrangement. In the period in the US known as the free banking era from 1837 to 1863, many banks sprang up that issued currency with no oversight of any kind by the federal government. These so-called free bank notes did not work very well as a medium of exchange. Given that there were so many banks of varying reputation issuing notes, they sold at different prices in different places, making transactions quite complicated. And as supervision was largely absent, banks had limited restraint in issuing notes and did not back them up sufficiently with specie, thereby debasing their values. This era of wildcat banking ended up being a long and costly period of banking instability in the history of the US, with banking panics and major disruptions to economic activity. It was, after some further hiccups, followed by the establishment of the Federal Reserve System in 1913. Let me present a final example from Mexican monetary history. A little-known fact is that Mexico had the first series of hyperinflations at the beginning of the 20th century. My country had a revolution from 1910 to 1921, in which no central government existed in an effective way, with many factions fighting and disputing different territories. A winning faction would arrive in a territory, print its own money, and make void previously issued cash. So different bills issued by different factions coexisted, leading to chaos and hyperinflation. To give you an idea of the disorder, in 2015, that is over 100 years later, 4 trunks full of bills were returned to Mexico after having been appropriated by the US Navy in 1914, when the US occupied the port city of Veracruz. In the trunks, the Bank of Mexico discovered dozens of types of bills that the central bank had not even known existed. At the end of the conflict, a new constitution was drafted, having as a central Article 1 which gave the Bank of Mexico the appropriate institutional framework designating it the exclusive issuer of currency in the country. Once this was in place, hyperinflation ceased, illustrating the importance of controlling fiscal dominance. Based on these experiences, most observers, and I suspect all of you here, would agree that laissez-faire is not a good approach in banking or in the issuance of money. Indeed, the paradigm of strict bank regulation and supervision and central banks overseeing the financial and monetary system that has emerged over the last century or so has proven to be the most effective way to avoid the instability of high economic costs associated with the proliferation of private and public monies. The unhappy experience with private forms of money raises deep questions about whether the proliferation of cryptocurrencies is desirable or sustainable. Even if the supply of one type of cryptocurrency is limited, the mushrooming of so many of them means that the total supply of all forms of cryptocurrency is unlimited. Added to this is the practice of forking, where one offshoot of an existing cryptocurrency can be conjured up from thin air. Given the experience with currency debasement that has peppered history, the proliferation of such private monies should give everyone pause for thought. I will return to this later. We have learned over the centuries that money as a social institution requires a solution to the problem of lack of trust. The central banks that often emerged in the wake of the private and public money collapses may not have looked like the ones we have today, but they all had some institutional backing. The forms of this backing for the issuance of money have differed over time by country. Commodity money has often been the start. History shows that gold and other precious metals stored in the vault with governance, safeguards, can provide some assurance. Commodity money is not the only or necessarily sufficient mechanism. Often it also required a city, state, or nation-provided charter, as with the emergence of zero banks in many European countries. Later, the willingness of central banks to convert money for gold at a fixed price was a mechanism. Currency boards, where local money is issued one-to-one with changes in foreign currency holdings, can also work to provide credibility. The tried, trusted, and resilient modern way to provide confidence in public money is the independent central bank. This means legal safeguards and agreed goals, i.e., clear monetary policy objectives, operational instrument, and administrative independence, together with democratic accountability to ensure broad-based political support and legitimacy. While not fully immune from the temptation to cheat, central banks as an institution are hard to beat in terms of safeguarding society's economic and political interest in a stable currency. So where do cryptocurrencies fit in? One could argue that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies' attractiveness lies in an intelligent application of DLT. DLT, distributed ledger technology, provides a method to broadcast transactions publicly and pseudonymously in a way that achieves, in principle, ledger immutability. Who would have thought that having people guessing solution to what was described to me by a techie as a mathematical equivalent of a mega sudokus would be a way to generate consensus among strangers around the world through a proof of work. Does it thus provide a novel solution to the problem of how to generate trust among people who do not know each other? If DLT provides the potential for a superledger, could Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies then substitute for some forms of money? We don't have the full answers yet, but at this time, the answer, also in the light of historical experiences, is a sound no for many reasons. In fact, we're seeing the type of cracks and cheating that brought down other private currencies starting to appear in the house of Bitcoin. As an institution, Bitcoin has some obvious flaws. Let me start. Debasement. As I mentioned, we may be seeing the modern-day equivalent of clipping and cooling. In Bitcoin, these take the form of forks, a type of spin-off on which developers clone Bitcoin software, release it with a new name and a new coin, after possibly adding a few new features or tinkering with the algorithm's parameters. Often the objective is to capitalize on the public's familiarity with Bitcoin to make some serious money, at least virtually. Last year alone, 19 Bitcoin forks came out, including Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, and Bitcoin Diamond. Forks can fork again, and many more could happen. After all, it just takes a bunch of smart programmers and a catchy name. As in the past, these modern-day clippings dilute the value of existing ones to the extent that cryptocurrencies have an economic, to some extent, such cryptocurrencies have any economic value at all. Trust. As the saying goes, trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. Historical experience suggests that these assets are probably not sustainable as money. Cryptocurrencies are not the liability of an individual or institution or backed by any authority. Governance weaknesses, such as the concentration of their ownership, could make them even less trustworthy. Indeed, to use them often means resorting to an intermediary, for example, the Bitcoin exchanges, to which one has to trust one's money. More generally, they piggyback on the same institutional infrastructure that serves the overall financial system and on the trust that it provides. This reflects their challenge to establish their own trust in the face of cyber attacks, loss of customers' funds, limits on transferring funds, and inadequate market integrity. Inefficiency. Novel technology is not the same as better technology or better economics. That is clearly the case with Bitcoin. While perhaps intended as an alternative payment system with no government involvement, it has become a combination of a bubble, a Ponzi scheme, and an environmental disaster. The volatility of Bitcoin renders it a poor means of payment and a crazy way to store value. Very few people use it for payments or as a unit of account. In fact, at a major cryptocurrency conference, a registration fee could not be paid with Bitcoins because it was too costly and slow. Only conventional money was accepted. To the extent they are used, Bitcoins and their cousins seem more attractive to those who want to make transactions in the black or illegal economy rather than everyday transactions. In a way, this should not be surprising, since individuals who massively evade taxes or launder money are the ones who are willing to live with cryptocurrencies' extreme price volatility. In practice, central bank experiments show that DLT-based systems are very expensive to run and slower and much less efficient to operate than conventional payment and settlement systems. The electricity used in the process of mining Bitcoins is staggering, estimated to be equal to the amount of Singapore use every day in electricity, making them socially wasteful and environmentally bad. Therefore, the current fascination with these cryptocurrencies seems to have more to do with a speculative mania than any use as a form of electronic payment, except for illegal activities. Accordingly, authorities are edging closer and closer to clamping down to contain the risks related to cryptocurrencies. There is a strong case for policy intervention, as now noted by many securities, markets, and regulatory and supervisory agencies. These assets can raise concerns related to consumer and investor protection. Appropriate authorities have a duty to educate and protect investors and consumers and need to be prepared to act. Moreover, there are concerns related to tax evasion, money laundering, and criminal finance. Authorities should welcome innovation, but they have a duty to make sure technological advances are not used to legitimize profits from illegal activities. Finally, what role for the central bank? Central banks acting by themselves and/or in coordination with other financial authorities like bank regulators and supervisors, ministries of finance, tax agencies, and financial intelligence units may also need to act, given their roles in providing money services and safeguarding money's real value. Working with commercial banks, authorities have a part to play in policing the digital frontier. Commercial banks are on the front line since they are the ones settling trades, providing real liquidity, keeping exchanges going, and interacting with customers. It is alarming that some banks have advertised Bitcoin ATMs, where you can buy and sell Bitcoins. Authorities need to ensure commercial banks do not facilitate unscrupulous behaviors. Central banks need to safeguard payment systems. To date, Bitcoin is not functional as a means of payment, but it relies on the oxygen provided by the connection to standard means of payments and trading apps that link users to conventional bank accounts. If the only business case is used for illicit or illegal transaction, central banks cannot allow such tokens to rely on much of the same institutional infrastructure that serves the overall financial system and freeload on the trust that it provides. Authorities should apply the principle that the Basel process has adhered to for years, to provide a level playing field to all participants in financial markets, bank and non-banks alike, while at the same time fostering innovative, secure, and competitive markets. In this context, this means, among other things, ensuring that the same high standards that money transfer and payment service providers have to meet are also met by Bitcoin type of exchanges. It also means ensuring that legitimate banking and payment services are only offered to those exchanges and products that meet these high standards. Financial authorities may also have a case to intervene to ensure financial stability. To date, many judge that, given cryptocurrencies' small size and limited interconnectedness, concerns about them do not rise to a systemic level. But if authorities do not act preemptively, cryptocurrencies could become more interconnected with the main financial system and become a threat to financial stability. Most importantly, the meteoric rise of cryptocurrencies should not make us forget the important role of central banks play as stewards of public trust. Private digital tokens masquerading as currencies must not subvert this trust. As history has shown, there simply is no substitute. In conclusion, while cryptocurrencies may pretend to be currencies, they fail the basic textbook's definitions. Most would agree that they do not function as a unit of account. Their volatile valuations make them unsafe to rely on as a common means of payment and as a stable store of value. They also defy lessons from theory and experiences. Most importantly, given their many fragilities, cryptocurrencies are unlikely to satisfy the requirement of trust to make them sustainable forms of money. While new technologies have the potential to improve our lives, this is not invariably the case. Those central banks must be prepared to intervene if needed. After all, cryptocurrencies piggyback on the institutional infrastructure that serves the wider financial system, gaining a semblance of legitimacy from their links to it. This clearly falls under central bank's area of responsibility. The buck stops here, but the also starts here. Credible money will continue to arise from central banks' decisions taken in the light of day and in the public interest. In particular, central banks and financial authorities should pay special attention to two aspects. First, to the ties linking cryptocurrencies to real currencies, to ensure that the relationship is not parasitic. And second, to the level playing field principle. This means same risk, same regulation, and no exceptions allowed. Thank you very much.
Agustín. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. It's a privilege for me to chair the discussion on a paper given by such an eminent member of the central bank community, and it's a personal pleasure to chair a discussion on money, which doesn't happen so often these days. I liked your flower picture of the BIS, but having written so much about money, I hesitate a moment to use this symbol, because we know flowers are wilting sometimes very, very quickly. But this flower called money, its sustainability is not dependent on giving enough water, but to be built on trust. And this was the key message of your speech. And just one small remark, short remark on bitcoins. Just yesterday I read a study which came to the conclusion that so far the producing, or rather mining, of bitcoins has already cost $5 billion in production. So this is, in a time of electronic money, perverse, because this is much more expensive, Herr Thiele, than to print banknotes. Think just for a moment about this. So it's a perverse development. But I'm not here to give another speech on a subject on which you are the real expert. I open the floor for questions. Who wants to start?
Two questions. This is not an abuse of your time. One is more technical, the other one is more philosophical, if you will, along the lines you mentioned at the beginning. The first one, more technical. You referred mostly to Bitcoin and to what the BIS called the retail cryptocurrencies, but not that much about the wholesale cryptocurrencies, which I think is a development that has much fewer of the risks and problems that the Bitcoin has. So perhaps I would like to know whether you or the BIS or in the central bank community you are discussing this issue of wholesale cryptocurrencies used to facilitate payments in among banks, which is, in my view, a much better development. So that's more the technical. The more philosophical is about trust. And the question is whether trust is assumed underlying in the central banks and in the central bank issued money, but this has not always been the case. In many examples of countries where actually the central banks do not enjoy a lot of trust, and the money they create is not really used by the citizens as really fulfilling the three functions of money. So in that sense, perhaps the surge of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies has some reason, let's say, for some people who would not really trust the fiat money we have today. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question. Well, I would, the first question, as you say, technical, I would say it has several answers. One, at least from most of what has been happening in the cryptocurrency world, they are trying to appeal the retail sector, basically to massify its use. Now, the distinction should be drawn to what is DLT technology, which in a way, Bitcoin is a representation of an application of DLT technology. And there is where we at the BIS have come to the conclusion that such a technology could be used to make more efficient wholesale markets and wholesale financial applications, like, for example, the settlement of transactions. So basically what my message is that technology by itself does not constitute money, but that technology could have alternative uses that are could be efficient and adequate for the financial sector and for central banks to use, and we're exploring that. Another important element, and that's something that I didn't really pay justice because I think it's a work under progress, is the issue of digital banks, the digital currency issued by central banks. And that has many implications, as I mentioned, in terms of financial stability and really the reach of a central bank. And it basically would change the architecture of the financial system. So there, it's something that is work in progress, and I would think more each individual central bank will have to make up its mind. Now, in terms of trust, yes, you're absolutely right. As I say, what today we consider the safest form of central banking, which is an autonomous central bank, is not bulletproof. And coming from a country where we have been battling for gaining this trust, is a battle you have to give every single day. But at the end of the day, I think that independent central banks, when they are the manifestation of society being fed up with instability, and society finds a way to reflect that degree of unhappiness in a legal change that is supported by the public, I think that is the most solid foundation for trust. And as a matter of fact, I would say that in Mexico, we had an autonomous central bank for now more than 20 years, and it resulted pretty much as a fed up of society being completely fed up of fiscal dominance. So they said, well, we have to put an end to this. The political moment was there, and a political change at the constitutional level took place. And so it was the agreement of society that they wanted stability. And the way to instrumentalize that in a state is precisely by putting it in the Constitution and enforcing it. Now, yes, constitutions can be changed. Laws cannot be observed. But if society as a whole is convinced that they want stability, it will come back. So I think that's why I say that it's a matter of social convention and finding the appropriate institutional arrangement. And by the way, I would say that society being fed up with instability many decades before Mexico is what happened here in Germany. And that's why you have such a powerful and exemplary central bank as the Bundesbank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carstens. Thank you very much for your very clear words, and I fully agree to your conclusions. Christoph Hedrich from Commerzbank. May I ask you about a real game changer that perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more. What would happen if central banks would issue digital money as a second form of legal tender, offering accounts for everybody, even non-banks? And what would be the responsibility of central banks in this context?
Well, there are different ways of this happening. As I already mentioned in my presentation, central banks have produced digital currencies already at the wholesale level. No, I mean reserves held by banks, they're in electronic form, they're electronically exchanged, and so on. I think the interesting aspect is, or the challenging aspect is, the issue of bringing it to the retail level. And that could amount all the way for each individual that would like it to have an account at the central bank. Now, that's a huge question because that means a very stiff competition or an important competition for private financial intermediaries. You end up with questions like, what would the central bank do with that money? Would it pay interest or not? If it's widely used, do you want an institution that was created to safeguard, the value of money as such, to be probably one of the most important intermediaries in your own country in terms of deciding what the credit policy is and what is not? So, I mean, that's why this is a huge question. I mean, in terms, we're in SAFE, in the House of Finance, SAFE is the Center for Architecture. This is would be a huge architectural change. My own sense is that we have to be very patient and we need to really think twice about it because it raises many issues and it can expose us to certain vulnerabilities that we might not be prepared yet for them.
Perhaps it's a moment to just mention, the Bank of England has published a staff paper on central bank digital money or currency, more than 100 pages. And they come to the conclusion that the issuance of central bank digital money by Bank of England would create an economic advantage of close to 3% point of GDP. I was really surprised that on the basis of such a model, which is so sensitive to changes in structural aspects, and based on some assumptions that, for example, the full return would be invested to reduce distortionary taxes, etc., to present such a paper sort of claiming for the issuance, I think it's for me not convincing. And again, it all points down to trust. Of course, this could be guaranteed by the central bank, but the consequences for the whole financial industry are so tremendous, the adjustment process, etc. So it would be very difficult to take all these risks implied in such an approach into account. I fully agree with you. At least patience is requested, at least.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for this very interesting speech. My question is, you talked about cryptocurrencies and financial stability. My question is, do you think that the current level of activities in this market is already a threat to financial stability? And if yes, why? And if no, if your answer is negative, what would make you nervous? Which developments would make you nervous? Thank you.
Well, I think here, if you think about the traditional acception for the concept of financial stability, I would say that we are not yet at the level where this would really present a systemic risk to the financial systems of most countries. But you know, if you take probably a narrower view, and sometimes, let's say, a view in which you measure financial stability not in a traditional sense, but more you manage the concept of financial unhappiness or a distrust. I mean, I think what is a little bit, it's not a little, it's quite a concern, is the fact that many of the new adherents to these cryptocurrencies are retail, are households, you know, common persons. Now, if you have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million, even if their average holdings is very small, you have 3 million people that probably might have lost their money. And that at some point can become a social concern. And it's something that you don't want to happen because it weakens the trust on your financial system. So that's why I think it's important that we open up the debate, that we spell out what we have learned through history in terms of how tough it has been to build institutions to get trust. I mean, the central bank we know today has taken years and years, and we have learned those experiences. And suddenly, you know, we have a laissez-faire experiment where money can just flower out of, as I say, a group of programmers and a catchy name. I think it can damage that trust. So I would say that would be my concern. No? It's more like eroding a fundamental element of what should be the foundations of a modern financial system.
Hello.
Yeah. Mr. Carstens, thank you very much for that very interesting speech. So there are so many aspects that come to my mind, but one aspect I want to mention at the end of your talk, you said there should be thinking about regulatory action. And I'm just wondering what type of action that could be. So if you were from the, let's say, from the Basel viewpoint, would recommend other countries, other central banks, what to do about cryptocurrencies on the regulatory side, what list of activities could you envisage? And one point I want to make is, I mean, the Bitcoin or any other of these currencies, there is no institution that you can easily grab, right? There is basically nothing. It's just a free arrangement, a free agreement between people who just carry out their choices. So how can you limit this?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I think what gives a good opportunity to regulate is what I underlined in my talk, which is the interconnectedness with the formal financial system. I mean, if you go to the pure, I would say, version of a Bitcoin, it should be peer-to-peer. But that is very inefficient. And what has happened is that they have needed to move to rely on constructs that are more traditional, let's say, financial intermediaries or infrastructures, like exchanges. If you think about it, an exchange for Bitcoin is almost a contradiction from the original inception. The original inception is to have everything decentralized. But then you come to the conclusion that it's so hard that you need to concentrate those exchanges to an exchange. So that's a contradiction. And then to give it viability in modern life, you have been forced to find a way to convert those cryptocurrencies into fiat money. And there is where we can act. Because as you say, Bitcoin, there is no institution, is something floating around in the cyberspace, and it doesn't have a nationality. But at some point, the conversion has to take place to Bitcoin, to fiat money. And I think in that interconnection is where we can act. And as much as we can, if in those infrastructures or those intermediation vehicles that try to mimic traditional vehicles that are regulated, as far as we can, we should regulate them in the same way. So there is where I think the most potentially viable way to regulate them is.
My question is, I think we are at a stage where we need a currency which is global and accepted globally, but doesn't have exchange rate risk attached to it. So the concept of a Bitcoin or a global currency is relevant. But what I see with Bitcoin is, and I as a non-tech person don't understand, the simple thing that I understand is a bunch of people who understand technology and who have bandwidth on computers can mine Bitcoins or cryptocurrency. And plus, you can't track. So for the purpose of taxes and regulation, you can't track this currency. So my question is, why are we allowing this currency to, because I think if you can't track it, there is a lot of, as we spoke, unknown dangers that we can't foresee. So why don't we look at a digital currency which is backed by all the central banks and which everybody recognizes, rather than allowing a technology-backed cryptocurrency which we can't track?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have to start, I would say, in stages. At the end of the day, they have been currencies that have been created, for example, or combination of currencies like the SDR of the fund and so on. But it's hard to make them usable in every single part of the world. I think what we need to have is an operative international financial system, and we have many institutions that are geared towards having an adequate international financial system, like the fund, like the BIS, and so on. And now, I wouldn't rule out that in many decades we might have something as what you're mentioning, no? But for that, we also need, some understanding, I would say, of many aspects that, even at the national and far more at the regional level, present some aspects of dispute, like, for example, how to conduct monetary policy. No? So here we are not only talking about a unit or account or a means of payment, but if you're going into a world currency, you would have to start discussing, world monetary policy, and therefore each country asking, well, I'm represented in that decision or not. So I think that I think is something that we are not prepared to undertake right now. But again, I think at the national level it can be addressed, and that's why the next step should be, how are we going to treat cryptocurrencies, and to decide for each central bank about how it wants to go about in terms of digital currencies in their own space.
So if there is more time, I just have one question and another question, which is the following. You were talking about the building of trust. So if we think of cryptocurrencies, which are like in a baby stage, they start their life. So as always, we would need a lot of time that trust can build. And maybe all these volatilities that we see are just an element of this trust building that's going on, right? So when I first heard about these cryptocurrencies, I thought there's just Bitcoin and that's it. But now we see suddenly a surge of these new monies coming and trying to attack the quote-unquote trustfulness of that one currency that we have seen for a longer time now. So, I mean, there may also be a process of trust building that we are, while we speak, right? That's going on, and so things might settle in a certain way, which is more like what people have thought in theory when they talked about cryptocurrencies. So the longer we wait, maybe the more difficult it will be to do something against this, I would say, market-driven development of a currency outside
the other way around.
Well, I think here,
dynamics in it.
I think here the clear issue, and this is something that we have seen recently, is that there is always attempts to make money out of nothing, and this seems to be the case, no? And what is not controlled here is the supply, and so that's why, part of the trust is precisely how are you going to create that supply, and that's why the central bank institution is very important. But again, a laissez-faire type of experiment doesn't seem to, through history, has seemed to be not a right approach. Again, there are some features that probably, certainly the rise of cryptocurrencies has probably made central bankers think more about people wanting more digital solutions to their payments needs, no? And therefore, as I say, there might be some aspects of the technology that are useful. So, yes, this episode can bring good side products, but I don't think the final objective, which is to substitute a central bank issued currency, would be achieved or obtained by this process.
Agustín, I've found your speech extremely stimulating, especially because you put the emergence of bitcoins and other digital monies in the context of the history of money,
yes,
which goes long back. And I think this is again a case in which looking back into history can tell us something which we might overlook if we trust only on models, etc. So the longer I was listening to you also during the discussion, the more I was reminded of a remark once, or a paper by Karl Popper, who once said, institutions are like fortresses. They need strong walls, but they have also to be manned properly. I think you are an example of the need for the right personalities in place. For me, you are a kind of incarnation of trust in money, and what is interesting in your career, which Jens Weidmann shortly presented at the beginning, that when changing from being a finance minister to a central bank governor, you did not have to change your position.
Yes.
And this is quite unusual. This is quite unusual. So thank you for your stimulating talk, for the discussion. Thank you for coming, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.